This is the story of the Gary Crooks Memorial Center and the ABCD Cultural Arts Center that called the Crooks building home. But before the Gary Crooks Memorial Center and the agencies that occupied it, there was a boy. His name was Gary Crooks, and his tragic death became the reason that there is a memorial center at all. Gary Crooks, an 8-year-old boy, was no different than other children who play in their neighborhoods. For Gary, backyard was the common area of the P.T. Barnum projects and its surrounding area. He lived there with his parents and siblings. In April of 1970, Gary went out to play with his brother and a friend, as children do. In Gary's neighborhood stood an unfenced, unguarded settling tank belonging to a sewage plant. While running and playing along the tank wall, Gary slipped and fell and drowned. Massive protests led by the residents of PT called for better living conditions and safe areas for children to learn and play. 4 years later, the Gary Crooks Memorial Center opened with Mrs. James Crooks in attendance. On that day, it was dedicated to, in quotes, many successful years of community service, end quote, by then HUD Area Office Director Lawrence B. Thompson. The nearly $500,000 property was expected to be home to the ABCD West End office, ABCD Family Planning Unit, Greater Bridgeport Community Mental Health Center, Hall Neighborhood House Youth Outreach and Prevention Center, a nutrition education program, Project OWN, Public Health Nursing Services, a Senior Citizen Center, SADA, which stands for Spanish American Development Agency, and the Crown Jewel, the Cultural Arts Center. The agencies and programs were complementary and served the public. Gary Crooks Memorial Center was truly a center for the community. Witness the recollection of Cyril Lamont Williams, who was interviewed in 2016. Mr. Williams was around 7 years old on a summer Saturday morning when he accidentally discovered the Art Center at its home in the Gary Crooks Memorial Center. Williams, a resident of the P.T. Barnum housing projects, was looking for the summer lunch program he'd attended for the last 2 years, only to be informed that meals were served on weekdays only. He recollects being met at the door by Wendy Bridgeport, a visual arts instructor who invited him in to listen to an African drumming lesson. Drumming instructor Ralph Williams, no relation to Cyril, and soon after piano and percussion instructor Jami Allende, influenced, encouraged, and taught a boy who would later attend the Berklee School of Music and become a professional musician. Their influence and guidance extended past the active years of the Arts Center. Cyril credits the Arts Center with providing a safe haven in a neighborhood becoming increasingly dangerous, within a city fighting the deterioration that larger cities in the tri-state area could not keep at bay. During its most productive years, the Arts Center was a creative, cultural, social, and political space that flourished. It was far more than a place to learn art, photography, and music. The new space had discrete classrooms, large workspaces, a dark room, offices, and a kitchen. Drawing, painting, sculpture, photography, music, dance, cooking, and movie screenings were just some of the many activities offered. A student might go outdoor camping, visit a museum in New York, or attend a concert in the park. The move to the Gary Crooks Center increased the attendance of nearby residents and attracted the interest of adults who wanted to experience what the neighborhood children were doing. Throughout the 1970s and into the 80s, the Arts Center maintained its character as a vibrant and relevant place for the engagement of arts and ideas. The late 1980s marked the decline of blue-collar prospects, stable incomes, and clear pathways to improve upon the education, employment, opportunities, and finances of the generation that came before. Like so many cities in America, large and small, the combined effects of disappearing working-class jobs and an aggressively growing drug epidemic created a climate of increased poverty, addiction, poor health, failed public education, unsafe areas, and escalation of violent crime. The economics and ills of the 1980s hit Bridgeport hard. The Arts Center was an early casualty. Severely limited funding, decreased staffing, and a population of young people heading off to college and jobs, or gravitating to the supply and demand of crack cocaine, turned the Art Center into a shadow of its former self. The shuttering of the Art Center is both a metaphor for the decline of urban life in the 1980s and an indictment on government's regard for its city-dwelling citizens. Supplies dried up, students stopped attending, and the few remaining instructors reached a point where they could not or would not work without pay. Approximately 15 years after its brilliant beginning, the Arts Center slowly became one more victim in the statistical analysis on the impact drugs, crime, no funding, and even less care can have on a vulnerable community. A casualty of shifting priorities and abandoned for a new national ideal, the Arts Center lives on in the work created, the photographs that bear witness to shared experiences, and the trajectory of lives affected by both its existence and its demise. But what if the creativity and excitement and productivity of the Art Center could be recreated and reimagined now, responsive to and reflective of our current time in its former home? What if the Gary Crooks Memorial Center was returned to its original intended usage? What if what was promised to Mrs. Crooks in 1974 became